The problem with the Christendom teaching is what I call contradiction of principles. Let me repeat. The problem with the entire religious teachings, the entire Bible teachings of the Christendom is mostly contradiction of principles. That simply means they tell you A and then they tell you B. They tell you one thing as this is the right thing, and then they tell you what contradicts it as what is the right thing. And what does this cause? It causes confusion. And the reason why this has continued to happen is because the Christendom have been teaching the Bible in the wrong way, the absolute wrong way. What do I mean by that? The Bible is the greatest psychological book that's ever been written. But they teach it as a book of contemporary history. They teach it as a book of literal history. A sort of an account of events or people, figures that lived in time and space, just like you and I are living today communally. Whereas the Bible is a book whose teaching is simply the drama that is taking place in the psychological drama that is taking place in your consciousness, your awareness. And all the characters are not figures that lived in time and space just like you and I are living today. They are the personifications of your consciousness and its different attributes. That is why there is so much confusion and contradictions in the teachings of the Christendom. I will give you an example. Go to Mark 12:31. It tells you, love your neighbor as yourself. That is supposed to be the greatest of the commandments. The commandment number 2, love your neighbor as yourself, is supposed to be the greatest commandment. But now go to 2 Corinthians 6:14. It says, do not be unequally yoked with unbelievers. How can you on one breath tell people that the greatest commandment is to love your neighbor as yourself? And love your neighbor as yourself clearly indicates that your neighbors, it did not define the neighbor. It just say love your neighbor. And we know that your neighbor can be, of course, your neighbor as in where you live, or your family member, or so all human beings within your sphere are your neighbors. In fact, all human beings that walk the surface of the earth are your neighbors. So the Bible is clearly saying in that mark, love your neighbor as yourself. Now, he's not saying love your believer's neighbor as yourself. Do you know why that is the greatest commandment amongst, the 10 commandments? It's because loving your neighbor as yourself, if you love your neighbor as yourself, you won't treat your neighbor in a wrong way, just like you will not treat yourself. So that particular commandment tells the long and short. It defines love in its entirety. Now that's one bit of it. Okay, that's on the side, let's keep that on the side. Now it goes to Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, and he's saying do not be unequally yoked with unbelievers. Is that a sign of love that is supposed to be love your neighbor as yourself, that is supposed to be the greatest commandment? I'm asking you, isn't that discriminatory? Isn't that discriminatory? How can you advise believers not to be unequally yoked with unbelievers? So you see, it is discriminatory. It doesn't fall within the confines or the definition of what we know the Bible, the scripture indicated as the greatest commandment. And for that reason, it means there is more to that 2 Corinthians 6:14 that said, do not be unevenly yoked with unbelievers. It means there is more to it. And the only way you can see the true meaning of that particular Bible, quote, is if you understand the Bible to be a psychological book. If you do not understand the Bible to be a psychological book, you will keep having this contradiction of principle. On the one hand, you tell somebody to love your neighbor as yourself. On the other hand, you say, don't associate with them, discriminate against them. Because you are believer, they are unbeliever. So don't have anything. Stay away from them, discriminate against them. That can be what the scripture meant. And I know it is not what the scripture meant. And this is the problem with the teachings of the Christendom. They teach the Bible as a literal, story. They teach it as a literal, history. Whereas it is sacred history. It is psychological drama that is telling us, that is here to help us conduct our inner world, which is responsible for shaping our entire physical world experiences. So if you ask me, what does this Bible verse actually speak to? Since obviously when you look at it from the from the literal point of view, it clearly indicates there is a contradiction of principle. You can't tell somebody to love on one hand, and then on the other hand, you are telling the person to discriminate. That it means that the Bible does, it never intended to tell anybody to discriminate because some people are unbelievers. So that brings us to what is the actual deeper psychological meaning of that particular 2 Corinthians. And it is simply, there in that particular verse. It speaks to believers and unbelievers. So it's very direct. You see, the Bible, the Illumined mystics, past masters in the art of psychology that wrote the Bible, use, the things that humans can relate with to hide the deeper psychological meaning. And in this instance, what that is telling you, because we now know it cannot contradict what the scripture obviously told us is the greatest commandment. Because as we all know, God is love. So love cannot discriminate. That is settled. So, but what is this speaking to? 2 Corinthians speaking to. The answer is there. Unbelievers and believers. It's just advising you not to follow the way of unbelievers. And unbelievers are simply those who do not have faith. That's what it is. It doesn't mean you shouldn't, you can't interact with them on a daily basis as your fellow human beings, as the Christendom teaches that particular Bible verse. It is saying, do not adopt that model of, faithlessness, unfaithfulness, because unbelievers simply means people who lack faith. And the Bible clearly stated, you cannot please God without faith. So that's what it's just saying. And believers are simply people who have faith. Now, I want to tell you, the problem here is that people don't even understand the deepest meaning of faith. Because faith is simply a tool or a phenomenon that helps you draw things in the unseen world into your seeing world, your world of senses, where you then have, physical, experience of those things. And those your seeing world are the things that are at the desire level. It is through faith. That's why Mark also tells us, when you pray, believe that you have received what you're praying for. and it will be yours. So the condition for receiving anything you're praying for is belief, and belief is faith. So what that Bible verse is clearly saying is telling you, look, faith is the only way you can please God. So you must always exercise faith. Don't take the lifestyle, or don't adopt the lifestyle of those who are not exercising faith. So this, particular Bible verse has nothing to do with people who are doing wrong things or doing right things, people who are good people are, because most of these the so-called born agains of this world, go close to them, you will be shocked. You see that all those rhetoric about born again, they are just grandstanding. Okay, so this is the bottom line here, is that is not what the Bible speaks to. It's not speaking to discrimination. It's just saying faith is what pleases God. Faith is the way to go. Faith is the way to get your heart desires. Faith is the word. Faith is righteousness. Okay, then faith is belief. So those who exercise faith are believers. Then unbelievers are the opposite, those who do not exercise faith. Because faith is the way to draw this into your world, would you rather be someone who exercises faith or be someone who does not exercise faith? That's just what that Bible is trying to. It's not teaching discrimination. It's just teaching to say, this is the right thing. Do it. Don't sort of adopt those who are not keeping faith. And that faith has nothing to do with whether anybody sins or anybody doesn't sin. By the way, sin of the scriptures, if you look at it from the psychological point of view, is simply to miss the mark. It's simply the opposite of righteousness. Because in Daniel it says, break off your sin by being righteous. And we also know that, I think Romans, okay, if I got that correctly, it said Abraham believed and it was counted unto him as righteousness. So it means that the opposite of sin is what? Righteousness. And the meaning of righteousness is belief. And belief is faith. That's why we've had a class where we taught the people to say, look, sin is not the breaking of moral code. Neither is righteousness the gatekeeping of moral code. No, those things just strictly speaks to how you form your physical world experiences. Through faith, you form it. And without faith, you can't form it. And that's why you can only please God if you're somebody who has faith. So that 2 Corinthians is just speaking to people who have faith and people who do not have faith. And we know that with faith, we can take charge of our destiny. So that Bible verse is just saying, that's the way to go. It doesn't mean you should go and discriminate, amongst your fellow human beings because you're born again and all of those nonsense they teach at the Christendom. My name is Abushi from the Deaf Foundation, an organization that teaches the Bible as a map of inner transformation. Okay, by that we mean that the teachings of the Bible are the psychological drama that is taking place in your consciousness, in your awareness, and all the characters and the actors in the Bible are simply the personifications of your consciousness and its different attributes. The Bible is not a book of religious dogmatism. Rather, it is a psychological book, the greatest one that has been written, that was proposed for handling and conducting your world of psychology, your mental world, which is responsible, directly responsible for the outcomes you see in your physical world. Join us every Sunday at 9 a.m. on Genti Facebook page and Deaf Foundation IP YouTube channel for our live sessions where we reveal and teach about the original deeper meanings of the Bible teachings, which is psychological. Hope to see you this Sunday. And I hope you've been able to understand today that, at least know some of these contradictions that the Christendom put out there, and also understand what believers and unbelievers mean. It has nothing to do with discrimination, because the greatest commandment is love your neighbor as yourself. And he didn't tell you to go and love your believer's neighbor. He just said your neighbor. Thank you for listening. Hope to see you this Sunday. Do enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.